Sir, we can start.
Yeah. So good morning, all the students. And we'll continue with the things that we were doing in the first lecture. I think in the first lecture, if you recall, we did some review, a very quick review of classical formalism. And then we discussed what are the failures of the classical formalism in the atomic domain. And then I ended the lecture by just briefly mentioning the sort of initial efforts to overcome those problems, which was called old quantum theory. So today's lecture again is very important. It's again the main, as the title says, physical inputs to quantum mechanics. So it's going to basically deal with, as you will see, uncertainty principle. And these two lectures are important for the mathematics of quantum mechanics that will come later from lecture 3. Okay, now let's begin. The contents will be first. I'll once again revise the wave nature of electron that I mentioned yesterday. And then the main part of the lecture is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And connected with is, we'll mention these things, but we are going to discuss the double slit experiment in some detail to understand what this wave particle duality is all about and how quantum mechanics resolves it. And of course, references and examples. So the wave nature of electron. I mean, we discussed the particle nature just yesterday. Photoelectric effect was particle nature of light. So radiation exhibits wave particle duality. How now the question is how to build a proper theory for this wave particle duality of a photon or light. Now you should realize that any theory of photons must obviously be relativistic. By relativistic, I am going to use this term relativistic and non-relativistic often. So let me explain it. Relativistic region of physics is when the speeds of the concerned objects are comparable to the speed of light. Of course, they can never be equal to c except for light itself, the photon. If electron is in a relativistic region, its velocity will be very close, but less than c. However, if v by c, the ratio v by c is very small, that means velocity of the electron is much smaller than the speed of light, then you don't have to do all full relativistic quantum mechanics. You need non-relativistic quantum mechanics. And as you can expect, that theory is much easier. So I think history does not go by what is easy to learn or what is not easy to learn. In history, the photon picture gave the first hints of that something is wrong with classical physics. But as time went on, from the actual non-relativistic quantum theory started more or less with uh, Bohr's theory. Of course, Einstein and Debye had done some work on specific heats, but basically the atomic theory, non-relativistic atomic theory, started with the great paper of Bohr's theory in 1910, and then of course it was old quantum theory till, as I told you yesterday, we came to the fully modern version by 1927, which is the aim of this course, to tell you this modern version. Almost concurrent means side by side, the quantum theory of radiation, pioneered means put forward first by Dirac in 1927. But that, as I said, relativistic quantum mechanics is not a simple matter. So that area could not be completed, or although Dirac started it, it needed much further development. And there was a very fascinating history of what all happened. And it culminated in quantum electrodynamics in 1950 or so. You might have heard of the names of Feynman, Schwinger, Tomonaga, who were the creators of quantum electronics. They got Nobel Prize, I think, in 1965 or something. Yeah. So we will restrict, therefore, to only the quantum theory of electrons or of any other atomic particles. What that means is, you see, electrons are sort of have no size as far as we know, but there are other particles like neutrons, atoms, etc. If you neglect their size, then you can apply the non-relativistic quantum mechanics of electrons to those particles also. If you ignore the size and consider them also. Sometimes you can ignore, sometimes you cannot. So in many situations, we can ignore the size. Next, yeah, there's some window coming in. I'll stop sharing. And again, should I, Professor Anvesh, should I stop?
Yes, please do that. Yes.
And stop share and share again. And then I select. Yeah. So, so we discussed the wave nature of electrons yesterday, and the de Broglie hypothesis we had mentioned. Let's repeat it. Now, photon satisfies E equal to h nu and P equal to h by lambda. This is what photon satisfies. Now, in a very important move, de Broglie conjectured in 1924 that similar relations might be true for electrons. This was just a bold conjecture. There was not immediately any proof of it. But as I told you yesterday, de Broglie in his PhD thesis made this hypothesis. Now you have to understand something that often is not told in, not very much emphasized in books, that why did de Broglie choose P equal to h lambda, the same relation as the relation for photon? Why did he not equal to h nu? He could have said that this is true for electron, which it is there with some reservation that I'm going to tell you. So the reason is the total energy of a particle is always undetermined to within a constant. Now this phrase in physics I'm going to use often, and therefore I want you to tell me in the chat, and I'll attend to this when I pause. You tell me why we can always add an arbitrary constant potential energy to total energy. Total energy is undetermined, means it is if you have energy and you add a constant to it, it does not matter to physics. That is, if you kinetic energy, of course, is very clear, p square by 2m or half mv square. But potential energy, you can always add a constant, and still there's no difference in physics. Please write in your chat why you think that is the reason. And if you understand the reason, you will know why de Broglie chose P equal to h by lambda rather than E to generalize for electrons. So please write that. And so that is the hypothesis, de Broglie, is that in each atomic particle of mechanical momentum P is associated a wavelength of lambda equal to h by P. Now it was, of course, that was a theoretical hypothesis. It was verified soon after in 1926, and it was verified by crystal diffraction experiments. Now electron beams of a certain energy they were allowed to impinge. Impinge means they strike a nickel crystal, and you see the important thing in diffraction thing. Now this is optics, which I assume you know. X-ray diffraction experiments you have done in BSc, etc. The important thing is, why do we need X-rays? Why not visible light for crystal? The reason is the slit width, which in X-ray crystallography is the separation between the planes of atoms. That should be a few times maybe of the order of the wavelength of light. So X-rays satisfy that condition. Their wavelength is about 1 angstrom, and the crystal spacings between atoms is also of that. So that is an ideal situation for diffraction experiments. If you do not know this, please read your book on optics, and it is actually obvious from the formulas that I'm going to give. Now, diffraction at maxima for the transmission grating are this d sine theta equal to n lambda. It is slightly different from reflection grating, but there's a 2 factor there, but don't worry about it. This is what optics tell us. So d sine theta equal to n lambda. Is the theta is the n is the order of maximum, and theta is the angle at which you get that maximum. And of course, the first one is n equal to 1. So what did these experimentalists do? They determined theta for n equal to 1. And d they knew separately from X-ray diffraction experiments. So you know d, they measured theta, and you for the first maximum, you can, so experimentally you can get lambda. And now I told you they knew the energy of the beam, so it's very easy to determine what de Broglie predicts for lambda, because from energy you can get momentum E equal to p square by 2n, and then lambda equal to h by p. So separately, theoretically, you can calculate, and you get experimentally lambda, and you match the two things, and that is how it was verified. And similarly, polycrystalline things, which are somewhat more difficult X-ray diffraction experiments, but they are also very elegant experiments, and they also verified the same thing. We need not go into the details of polycrystalline experiments. So that is the thing. Now it's not just electrons, although I'll be talking often of electrons. Other atomic particles also show wave nature. Now you have to understand an important point once again, which often is missed out by students, that crystal diffraction experiments need wavelength of the order of this. Why? Because that is interatomic spacing is of this order. Don't worry about factors. There can be 2 times or 1.5 times or whatever. So it's an order. And so D, as I've told you, wavelength should be of this order. And P equal to h by lambda h we know. So P, so crystal diffraction experiments, you can say, need a certain value of P of the particles which are bombarding. Now kinetic energy is P square by 2n. So it is obvious from this expression that if the particle mass is large, they will need less energy for showing diffraction. I hope it is obvious. You need P for the same P for everybody, for whether it is electron, neutron, or atom, whatever it is, what you are diffracting. But the energy will differ very widely from electron to neutron. So please remember this point, often not emphasized. It is there, it's nothing new point, but so at least you should keep this in mind. So for example, if I want neutron diffraction experiments, then I don't need the energy that electron I told is 15 electron volt. So here I would need, because there's an M factor here, I would need much less energy, 2000 times less energy. And this is of the order of thermal energy. That is why if you get a fast neutron source, say from a reactor or something, then they have to be thermalized. Thermalized means brought to room temperature. And room temperatures energies are of this order, so they are ideal for. So such experiments have been done. In fact, in our country also in BRC, which was reactors, give very good sources for neutrons, but they have to be thermalized before you do. And there was a very internationally very high quality work done in the neutron difference in India. Similarly, experiments on wave nature of bigger atoms. Now, this is a new field. Earlier, it used to be electron, neutrons. This is called the field of atomic optics, etc. It's a very different field. I will not go into it now. Even I don't know great details of the field, but all I know from the quantum mechanics point of view, by the same formula, if M is large, I mean neutron, then atoms will be even still larger. So in that case, they will need even smaller, and therefore you will have to cool the, it will have to be at low temperatures. So that is the point I want to say. Yeah. Now, I think while I stop share, yeah.
Yeah, while Professor Kumar is
this is over. My next slide is the uncertainty principle. So please, yeah, Disha.
Yes, sir. So So should I first tell the answer to your question that why we do not
Yes,
choose
please,
potential
please.
energy?
Please. Tell
Okay, so most of the most of the students seems to be answering that potential energy is not defined. It needs to be defined properly between two reference points. So that is why we do not choose potential energy. Any constant could be added because force is a gradient of R. So that is the answer which most students have seemed to be doing.
Excellent. So it was in fact a very simple question. It is a question at the junior college level, and it's very nice that everybody is answered. That is the answer, that force is equal to minus gradient V. So it's a derivative of V. So all of you know, if you add a constant, doesn't matter to a derivative. Force is the physical thing, and potential is a quantity just added in, defined in physics for some good reasons. So therefore, it's the correct answer. So I hope you understood that total energy of a free particle, you can put p square by 2m plus a constant. It's no physics is going to change. And that's the reason they probably use the p relation, because p, there is no such arbitrariness. The word arbitrary means freedom. You can do what you like. That is called sometimes arbitrariness. So fine. So any other thing, any other questions?
So there is a question that where can we possibly ignore quantum mechanical nature of electron and why?
Quantum mechanical nature of electrons can never be ignored in atoms, no doubt about it. Sometimes, of course, when you do cloud chamber experiment, there are reasons why it acts like a particle. So if you're saying when does it act like a particle, it acts like a particle when you're talking of its trajectories in electric and magnetic fields, etc. That time, the quantum nature does not come, because you are not doing its wave character, it's particle characteristic. Last time I told you, when you are doing the when you are localizing the particle, then it acts like like the classical particle. Next.
Okay, so there is another question that why we use different formula for momentum of electron and neutron than that of photon.
No, we have used the same formula. We have used the formula is the same. Peak energy formula is different. I mean, formulas are all same for everybody. P is equal to h by lambda is true for neutron, electron, atom. E equal to P square by 2m is a good formula for non-relativistic regime, true for everybody. So when did I say it's a new different formula? No, it's the same formula. Next question.
Okay, sir. So there are no other questions so far,
Okay,
I see.
I'll go ahead now. So
Okay.
I go with the uncertainty principle. Yeah. So consistent means something which agrees with particle duality is a new idea, and that's uncertainty principle. And all of you know that we cannot simultaneously means at the same time. At the same time, we cannot determine position and momentum of a particle with perfect precision. And which another way of saying is you can't prepare a body, an electron with a definite value of x and p. So you don't need to use the word measure. You can even say we cannot prepare an electron state with a definite value of x and p. You can prepare it with reasonably, tolerable range of x and tolerable p. So, but not absolute exact precision. So that is what the uncertainty principle says, and it says that the product of their uncertainty is at least h cross of the order of. I have written of the order of. So don't only quantum mathematics, quantum formalism. When we do, it will tell you exactly what it is, because you will need to define what is delta x and delta px. But if you qualitatively define uncertainty, qualitatively means not mathematically, just roughly you define, then you have to put this symbol is of the order of magnitude, but this equally important. But mostly it will be greater. In any practical situation, it will be greater, but you can't have less than of the order of h cross, no matter how much you refine the measurement technique. And similarly, analogous means similar. There is an energy time uncertainty relation for this thing, delta in delta p. I am going to talk about it later after the uncertainty. So this is a diagram taken from Schiff, and it's available in it's a very famous diagram. It's called Heisenberg microscope. It's a thought experiment, and in which an electron is being, we want to localize an electron by the photon, and the electrons, the point is electrons, just now listen to various points very carefully because it's a very subtle thing. So electrons' initial momentum has been precisely determined. Now you'll ask me how. There are ways of determining precise momentum, just as there are ways of determining precise position. The whole issue is, can you determine both simultaneously at the same time? That is the issue. So electron's momentum has been defined. Now we want to determine its position. So we let a photon beam, let a photon actually go into this single photon. It should be, beams should be such that you have a single photon here, and then it will scatter off, and the photon will be detected. And all of you know, photon, when it detected, it acts like a particle, etc., etc. So now this is a diffraction experiment. This is exactly what happens when you study optics, and this is called the resolving power. How much can you resolve? How much resolving power has to do with how much certain you can be of the position. So resolving power is not a quantum mechanical idea, it's an old optics idea. How much can you distinguish between 2 points which are close to each other, which in our way of saying is how much can you determine the position of this electron. So that is given by standard optical formula. I have given you the description of this. So it's a microscope, and I have told you already, we wish to determine its position. Here a single quantum of gamma ray. The scattered gamma ray passes through the microscope and is detected. The initial X component of both the electron and the photon are assumed to be known precisely. So momentum alone, as I have told you, can be. In optics, diffraction limits the resolving power. So, and there is a well-known formula for this. There is a well-known formula for this. Yeah, and that formula is, I should go to the previous slide. That formula is, yeah, you're seeing this formula, that delta x is lambda by sine alpha, sine epsilon, where epsilon is that half angle which you do. Yeah. So now, so we know delta x, that's given by standard resolving power formula, that is lambda by sine alpha. Why is it lambda by sine alpha? The greater the smaller the wavelength, the better it is. Please understand remember your old optics formula. The smaller the wavelength, the better it is for resolution. And sine epsilon, the denominator says that the greater the aperture means the diameter of the lens, the greater it is, the better it is. So you improve resolution by decreasing lambda and increasing aperture. So that is the formula, lambda by epsilon. Now the precise direction of the scattered photon is not known at all. I mean, not known. There is an, I'm sorry, I should not say at all. Scattered photon has an uncertainty. Now, why is the uncertainty there? Please go to the diagram once again. The uncertainty is because we don't know. I mean, we don't know from where the photon came. Did it come from here? Did it come from here? Did it come from... So how much is the uncertainty in the X component of this? Now, if P is the magnitude, P, this is P cos epsilon, and this direction will be P sine epsilon. So it can be P sine epsilon, it can be momentum here, and it can be momentum here, or it can be something in between. So clearly the uncertainty here is momentum is P sine epsilon. So that is the uncertainty in momentum. And uncertainty in momentum is P sine alpha, but P by de Broglie relation is H by lambda. So you see here, it's just the opposite. If delta x was lambda by sine epsilon, this is sine epsilon by. So now you take, now the point is this is scattered photon. So we have to add another argument. So by momentum conservation of this system, E minus plus gamma system, the uncertainty in momentum of the electron after scattering is equal to the uncertain momentum of the scattered photon. Because, initially everything was precise. And finally, but momentum conservation has to hold good. So the electrons momentum uncertainty is equal, and you can say opposite, but we are talking of magnitudes, is equal to the uncertainty in the momentum of the scattered photons. So it's because their initial momentum. I hope you understand the argument. You have p electron plus p photon going to p electron plus photon. The final photons has an uncertainty, so final electron also will have to be uncertainty because initially everything was well known. So that is how we get this uncertainty principle, lambda x by lambda p. So that's the answer to this question. Now, so the product of uncertainty is then of the order of h or h cross. Sometimes actually in quantum mathematical formalism, usually it will be h cross. But what we proved just now is h, and it simply does not matter because this is qualitative. You understand, qualitatively means not quantitative mathematics, but overall, making arguments of order of magnitude. So it doesn't matter whether it is h or h cross. It does not matter because we are estimating the order. When we define these quantities later in quantum mechanics, then of course you will have a definite relation, and it is actually of the order of h cross. So what happened in this? We tried to locate an electron whose known momentum and in the process we disturb the momentum. But disturbance is not the real issue. The real issue is we can't calculate how much is the disturbance. So that's the point. So please don't think this, because electron, even in classical physics, disturbances were there. But there the idea is disturbance is too small and it can be we can calculate how much is the disturbance. But that fails now in quantum mechanics. You cannot calculate this, an inherent uncertainty in the disturbance that you give. So that's the most important point. And another point you must notice that what we are talking of is an idealized experiment, and we are talking of theoretical minimum of optics. In practice, there will be many other problems with optics, the aberrations of the lens, and there are so many other things. So that will increase it, if at all. It will not decrease, it will increase we are doing an idealized experiment, and in which it is at least of the order of h cross. So obviously any practical thing will be more. So that is why we put the inequality sign. Next, I will very quickly, because I have spent considerable time on position. So the spirit is the same. Momentum measurement, what you do is, again, the position of the atom, you assume that it is known. The position of the atom is known, and you so by how do you know the position? By making lambda smaller and smaller, if you want to do it by an diffraction experiment. So let's take initial position of the excited atom is known, and we use Doppler effect to find its momentum. So you all know Doppler effect, I don't need to tell you. So if you know the inherent intrinsic frequency, and if the atom is approaching you, it will have a larger frequency, and the factor, at least in non-relativistic case, is just this simple V by C factor. So knowing nu naught, already knowing, observing, experimentally determining nu, you determine. This is a standard method for measurement of velocity of anything, so much used in astronomy, as you learned yesterday. And nu naught is the frequency of radiation, excited atom when it comes to rest. Nu is the Doppler shifted frequency, so you can determine speed from this. And once you know speed, multiplied by m, and you get the momentum. And now there is an important point that this nu is not a very definite, neither nu nor nu naught. Experimentally, we know that actually there is an intrinsic spread and depends of you take it as an experimental fact that if an excited state has a lifetime tau, then the minimum width, minimum spread, or you can say minimum uncertainty in nu is of the order of 1 by tau. This is an experimental fact known, well known to spectroscopists before before Heisenberg came along. So, and therefore, you have therefore there is a definite delta P, because what is V? V is C nu upon C nu. Let's take a delta. Delta nu will be, there is no delta nu will be delta nu naught delta V by C. So you can just transfer the factors and you get delta V to be this, and therefore just multiply by P, and that gives you the uncertainty in momentum. So why is the uncertainty in momentum coming about? You see, please remember, again, understand the argument. Position of the atom is known. We are trying to determine its momentum. Now there is an intrinsic uncertainty in momentum. So what? I mean, what happened to the position? Now comes the real point, that in so doing, we have also spoiled the position. In so doing, we have spoiled the position. Why? Because when the atom de-excites, and there's a tau time it takes. Now, it's one of the basic facts of physics that radioactive or excited state happens when they de-excite. There's a certain lifetime, but nobody can tell when actually. That is only an average lifetime, or mean lifetime, as you say, or what is called mean life of an excited state. You have heard of those things in radioactivity. Even in radioactivity, when a nucleus decays, you don't know exactly when it decays. You roughly know the mean time. So similarly here, we don't know exactly when the electron came. It could have been half of tau, it could have been right in the beginning, or it could have been at the end, etc. So there is an uncertainty in time when it comes. And this shows up when it comes, there is an actual recoil. And the recoil is h nu by mc. Because earlier the electron is at rest, then let's assume that is so it will be h nu and then h nu by mc. That will be the recoil of the momentum. There will be some recoil of the momentum, and but so the velocity of the atom will be decreased slightly, because it has gone the other way. If photon is emitted towards the observer, atom goes this way. But when this decrease in velocity took place, we don't know. We are uncertain about this. So that will introduce an uncertainty in the position, because h nu by mc, and we don't know when it happens. So for example, if a car is coming to you with a certain velocity and it changes velocity sometime, but we don't know when it changed. It could have changed in the start, or it could change later. Then obviously there will be a position uncertainty in the thing. Just though the initial position is known precisely, and if the momentum was known precisely, it could not have been known. The momentum measurement led to an uncertainty in its position. So both momentum is uncertain, position is also uncertain. You think about it, it's a bit of a subtle experiment, and it's detailed in Schiff, the classic book I told you. So please go through it again. It will not be absorbed immediately at first exposure of the experiment. And though you just multiply the product, once again it comes out to be h cos. Now just notice that in this setup there was no direct disturbance of the atom as such. So I think many of us think that in quantum mechanics uncertainty principle arises because we did something to disturb the atom. Here we did not do anything directly to the atom, but we set up an experiment to determine its momentum. And in the very process of that determination, that setup, intrinsically they came about the position uncertainty. So this is just to clarify the point that uncertainty principle should not be always thought of as some probe is disturbing the system, and therefore it should not be thought of in that. That's a bit simplistic, although not incorrect. It's not that always it happens. Sometimes it happens. In the position measurement it happened, but here it did not happen directly that way. Okay, and there are many other setups. So the state of particle can never be set up, and also any refinement experiment will not change the situation. Now try to understand it. In both the examples, if you reduce the uncertainty, the other uncertainty will increase. For example, in a Heisenberg microscope, you can improve precision of determinant position by what? Decreasing lambda. But then lambda is if decrease, then its momentum increases and the momentum uncertainty also increases. So there is no way to get out of this. In the Doppler experiment, momentum measurement is improved by having greater lifetime. So, momentum measurement, as we saw, it comes about because of the spread in frequency. The greater the tau, the less is the spread. So you can determine momentum better, but then it will spoil the uncertainty position. Go through the experiment again. And thus nature has an irreducible. Irreducible means it cannot be brought lower than this. It can't be reduced further. And that is of the order of h cross. So that is these two experiments established that. Finally, I won't do this in detail. The energy time uncertainty, because you must be having questions, which I'll pause in 5 minutes. The energy time uncertainty relation is delta I, a very similar relation. It says what it was obvious, that if a system exists in a particular state, delta T is like that excited atom. So if delta T is tau for an excited atom, then delta E cannot be 0. Then it will have to be at least h cross by tau. I hope you understand. If a system exists in a particular state for finite time delta T, then its energy cannot, because if delta T is finite, delta E cannot be 0. Then 0 into finite will not satisfy this relation. Only if delta T is infinite, then delta E can be 0, because 0 into infinity can give you a finite quantity. But if delta is finite, delta E cannot be 0. So this is what the uncertainty principle is directly coming from the experimental fact. What experimentalists found, that the spectral frequency is always uncertain. Spectral wavelengths are always uncertain, no matter how much you reduce the thing. This means the energy of an excited atom, I already told you. And what about the energy of the ground state? Now, ground state does not decay, so it stays there forever. So that can have a definite energy. And therefore, what will be the difference of energy? So difference of energy of excited and ground states, which is h naught. So delta nu naught will be of the order of 1 by tau. And this is experimentally borne out, as I already told you. So, I mean, if you want to arrive at, I have not arrived at, I have just given you the principle. But if you want to arrive at the uncertainty principle, then, I mean, delta E, delta T uncertainty principle, you can reverse these arguments. You can just reverse the arguments and you will get this thing. I started with this relation as given and then showed that it is what we see experimentally. So it's one and the same thing. You argue it in any way you like. Now, I want to finish this section by saying that the energy time uncertainty relation does not have the same formal means theoretical. In the theoretical formalism of quantum mechanics, it does not have. Informally, we are thinking they are similar, delta X, delta P is of the order of delta I, delta T. Informally, it looks the same, but in the mathematics of the formalism, they have very separate status. And therefore, delta T is a bit of a qualitative thing. It cannot be exactly defined in quantum mechanics in general, although there are ways of getting around this problem somewhat. And that is, as we shall see, why am I saying this? That R and P are clear-cut operators on the wave function. I think you have done MSc already first year, so you know all this. So you know R and P are operators on system, but time is not an operator. It is simply a parameter. It means it just labels, well, wave function at this time, or a wave function at another time. Time itself doesn't play the role of operator. So there is much about time energy uncertainty relation, but I think this should be enough because we have to do the next section also. So this should be enough. I will skip the little rigorous treatment about this right now. Now I pause and I ask you.
Sir, can you again reshare your screen?
Yeah, I'm doing that because I don't want to keep interrupting the. I don't know why this happens, and
Okay, there are several questions. So
Yeah.
I'll ask them. One of the question is that how do we fix H cross? Is it derived theoretically, or we have seen some experimental proof? And how was it possible for Heisenberg to estimate this relation during his time?
Yeah. These are two different questions. The first question answer is, it is, H, the Planck's constant can be determined experimentally in numerous ways, starting from black body radiation formula. You can determine, you just you just fit the theoretical formula with experimental curves and you get H. Photoelectric effect, of course, was a very important measurement of H itself, because photoelectric experiment says that kinetic energy is h nu. If you recall, I have to say orally, kinetic energy maximum is h nu minus work function. So if you plot kinetic energy versus nu, what will be the slope of such a function? H. So Millikan, Robert Millikan, who won Nobel Prize for his great work on experimental photoelectric effect, he did very rigorous photoelectric experiments and he found the value of H. H can be obtained in numerous other ways in physics, because you have to just, but basically you can say photoelectric effect was the first excellent determination of H. So H, of course, can be, there is no way H can be, to the question, can you obtain theoretically? The answer is no, not even now. H cannot be obtained theoretically. There is no other way. H is a given constant of nature. It's exactly like asking, can I theoretically determine the velocity of, uh, determine C? Theoretically, of course, I have to, from Maxwell's equations, I get waves and whose velocity turns out. So there is experimental determination of C. You have all learned in optics velocity of light measurements. Similarly, there are experimental measurements of Planck's constant. Similarly, there are experimental measurements of mass of electron, like charge of electron. You cannot obtain theoretically the charge of an electron, nor the mass of the electron so far, although that's one of the goals of particle physics. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get, there was some noise.
No, I don't know. So yeah, there was some noise from some other side.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, next question.
Okay, so
The second question was, what was the second question?
yeah, how was it possible for Heisenberg to estimate this?
No, that is, you have to look at the history of quantum mechanics. H had already come in the quantum equations, etc. And already Heisenberg had developed quantum mechanics. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle came as a thought experiment later to understand what's going on, because the history of quantum mechanics was such that they arrived at the mathematical formalism before they understood what we are talking about. It's a very strange thing. Generally, one knows beforehand what we are talking about and then develop the formalism. In quantum mechanics, this sequence was reversed. The full formalism was developed and it was applied to hydrogen atom, and it gave nice agreement, even modern quantum mechanics, and so many other things it did. But just what exactly is the wave function, and why is this happening, that you cannot determine the x and p's are associated with the operators, etc. It was not very clear what was going on. So physically in 1927, Heisenberg, he went on a trip to, with he and Niels Bohr were constantly engaged in debates about this matter. This thought came to Heisenberg in 1927, that perhaps the most important physical point about quantum mechanics is this uncertainty principle. He did it through a thought experiment. He didn't arrive at it experimentally. Yeah. Next question.
Okay, what defines a measurement?
Measurement means trying to obtain some value, some physical observable of a quantity. And I should advise to young students that, do not worry in physics too much about definitions of something. Now, it will almost stray into philosophy if you asked me what defines measurement. But however, your question is not a philosophical in today's quantum mechanics, because even modern quantum mechanics has the so-called measurement problem. And this question of yours is very relevant. There, I mean, what is a measurement interaction? I'll come to this point a little later, but it's too early to say here right now. You just say measurements to attempt to get the values of physical observables. Yeah, next.
Okay, so there is one question on energy time uncertainty. So other uncertainty principle comes from commutator relations, but the energy time, is it coming from observations?
Yeah, it does not. Energy time uncertainty relation can also come quantum mathematics, provided delta T is defined properly. T is certainly not an operator in quantum mechanics. That goes, but still we can define delta T in certain ways. Basically, the time, I can tell you the definition, it may not right now make sense to you. Delta T is the time in which the expected the time rate in which the change in the average value of a position of an observable is equal to its uncertainty. So people have defined delta T rigorously also. And from then you can get delta E, delta T mathematically from quantum mechanics, just as you can get delta Px, delta X mathematically. However, the statement that T is not an operator continues to be true. Yeah. So it should not be, yes, of course it is experimental. Everything is finally, whatever we say theoretically has to be borne out, has to be verified experiment. So of course it is rooted in experiment, but in quantum formalism, I think you were asking the question, can we get it out of the quantum formalism? Quantum formalism, of course, is based on experimental inferences. So quantum formalism does give you delta E, delta T, provided delta T is sufficiently rigorously defined. But T is not an operator in quantum mechanics, no matter what you do. Yeah. Next point.
Okay. So, sir, there are several other questions. Do you want to take them afterwards?
I think we should spend some more time in this double slit, and then at the end I can take, because a number of these questions will get
Yes.
recorded by this. And this
Yes.
is extremely important thing. So you can always ask in the chat and I'll answer that. So let me, if you permit me, I'll go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this experimental setup of the double slit experiment. You are all familiar with, interference experiment, Young's, and you learn all this in optics. It's the same setup, the double slit experiment for interference of photons. So the diagram shows this. Now, what are the observations? Please look at the diagram, the symbols. The symbols is, this is D is the separation between the slits, and small d is the width of the slit. And this is the x-axis, and this is the, please do this. This is photosensitive screen where photoelectron emission takes place when a photon. So when it impinges here, it acts like a particle. Otherwise, here the photon is behaving like a wave. But let's see it more rigorously what is happening. So what are the observations? The observations are, first of all, there is a diffraction, small diffraction pattern of width about del by d, as optics tells you for any waves. When the other slit is closed, interference pattern of angular speed lambda by d, just notice lambda by d is diffraction pattern and lambda by d is interference pattern. So when both slits are open, this is interference pattern. And the interference pattern, even for intensity R, now the important point, reduced to one photon at a time between A and B. So you should do the experiment for very, very low intensity where you can estimate that it's only one photon at a time is coming. Still interference pattern remains. So photon-photon interaction, any theories which tell you, no, some photons themselves are interacting, hence this strange phenomena is happening, that is not correct. This is a one photon effect. Very, very important point of quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, the typical quantum effects refer to one electron. One electron behaves like a wave. Do not think wave is a sort of a collection of particles, averagely speaking. So no, there's a lot of debate around this point earlier, but That is quantum interpretation. One particle is associated with it. Now for weak intensities, as in 3, no pattern for very short exposure time. The pattern builds up with time. Very important point. I told you even for weak intensities, there's an interference pattern. But if you look at carefully one by one, then what you see is photon sometimes is on one spot, then sometimes, and over the time, then it will give you interference pattern. So intensity remains same, but your exposure time is more. Then only you get. And of course, the usual thing for any interference that the total I is not equal to I1 plus I2. You know the famous thing that in light interference, amplitudes add and intensities don't add. And in fact, the difference between the sum and intensity is what is the interference term in optics. Exactly the same thing here. So what is a paradox? The wave picture of India explains all the observations except 4. What was 4? This. It cannot explain why for very low intensity and very low exposure time there is no interference pattern. There are only a few impacts localized here and there, which I said later build up. But if it is a real strict wave picture and not particle picture, this is not understandable. Strict wave picture, no matter how much is the exposure time, how low is the intensity, it has to be there. Interference pattern has to be there. So these little dots don't explain, are not explicable in terms of wave picture. The wave picture, if consistent, should lead to interference no matter how low is the intensity, how low is the exposure time. And of course, the paradox is wave nature cannot establish cannot explain all the facts, because when it is detecting, it's like a particle. So obviously it's a paradox that most of the observations can be done by particle picture, but the final detection needs I'm sorry, most of the observations are wave picture, the final detection is the particle picture. Now consider particle pictures. With particle pictures, the localized impacts on the screen are explained, because that's what particle is about. The particle is localized, it gives you impacts. Is what you expect from a particle. But obviously, it cannot explain the main thing. It cannot explain interference pattern. There's no natural way to see why I equal to. This is a historical. Newton's corpuscular theory is not able to explain, and Young's interference experiment explains the interference pattern. So this is well known. Particle pictures can't. Another way of putting it is the particle picture cannot explain why a photon going through one slit cares whether the other slit is closed or open. That is why interference pattern disappears when one slit is closed. Now, please look at this point, that when one slit is closed, then the interference pattern is found to disappear. Now, particle picture, it's impossible. I mean, we think photon is going through either one slit or the other slit. And I mean, why does it care whether when it is going through one slit, why should it care? I mean, particle picture, if you want to insist on particle picture, we'll say that because of some interaction with the slits, particles are built, some are going on this, at this point, at this localized point, and then there is an interference. It's not a satisfactory explanation, but that is what you might aim at. But if you aim at particle picture interpretation of interference pattern, you cannot understand why one slit, if you close, then the interference pattern disappears completely. That is the reason behind this thing. Thus, no single picture for an individual can explain all the observations. Photon seems to act like a wave between A and B and like a particle. So I think even if you do not follow all the earlier points, please look at it carefully. This discussion is very well given in Schiff, and I would suggest you go to Cohen-Tanuji, which does even a better job of this thing. So you please go through it. All these are subtle points, so it will not come in just one go. But the takeaway is this, that photon seems to act like a wave and like a part between A and B and in detection at B. And so this is the paradox of particle. And if you close one of the slits, then the photon seems to act like a particle, and the wave nature disappears, except for some diffraction. So what is the resolution of the paradox according to standard quantum interpretation? Now, standard quantum interpretation says what aspect is realized depends on the experimental arrangement. The given arrangement between S and B does not determine through which slit the photon goes. It does not localize the photon. So whatever S and B means, screen and the slits, the arrangement is not telling you through which slit the photon goes. You have not detected it. You are simply thinking it's a particle and it must be going through either this or that. This is your mental picture. If it's a particle, it's going, if photon is a particle, Einstein said that, so it must be going through either this slit or that slit. Okay, but then we can't explain wave. So modern quantum mechanics says, when did you determine it was a particle? Because the in-between, until you came to the screen, the in-between arrangement doesn't tell you through which you never determined it. So why are you assuming it's? So the philosophy is, unless you know it by measurement, don't make pictures, classical pictures of particles. If you have made measurement, then it will act like a particle. So the given arrangement does not determine through which slit, and therefore it does not localize the photon. So it's a wave. Hence, between S and B means the screen and the slit, the photon acts like a wave and gives interference. Very, very strange, I must say. It just goes against our intuition, but that's the way it is. So photon acts like a wave and gives interference pattern. Detection at screen, you all know, is a photoelectric effect. So there, that particular electron which is getting knocked out, as I told you yesterday, photoelectric is an electron-photon collision. So at that time, photon is knocking off one electron, it gets localized, it becomes a particle. So it depends on what you're doing. So quantum philosophy is, if your measurement is doing something, is probing its particle nature, it will be particle. If it is not probing its particle nature, it's acts like a wave. Very strange resolution, but that is the standard quantum interpretation, no matter how strange it might sound. But it's not that it's just hand waving and some people are saying some nonsense, and it's not true. It's very, very deep. So how to establish its correctness? So we can modify the arrangement through which the the photon to determine. So the double slit experiment as such does not determine. But if we modify the arrangement to say, well, photon goes through this particular slit, then you find it doesn't no longer acts like a wave, and the wave character disappears and there is no interference pattern. So that is what our conclusion is. Now we will this point has been both experimentally verified, and I will give you a theoretical proof using uncertainty principle why this is correct. So what is the objective I'm doing? I'm saying if the arrangement determines photon, then which slit the photon went, then the interference pattern should disappear. So I'm going a proof by contradiction, as they say. You must have heard in mathematics, proof by contradiction. I am saying, but I come to that in a moment. One trivial way is to place a photon detector next to one of the slits. The photon gets absorbed. There are so any photon received on the screen P is identified the one that has passed through. So obviously there will be no interference pattern because you have absorbed the photons from the other. But suppose we have a more sophisticated arrangement. Suppose we have a more sophisticated arrangement through which the photon has gone. For example, we could measure the recoil momentum of the diagram, which is different depending on the slit the photon has passed, because the angles are different. I must tell you, historically, these kinds of debates, I mean, Einstein and Bohr debated a lot in this point, and this particular thing, Einstein one morning, they were in a conference and Einstein came along with this, that, well, I can determine by recoil momentum, etc. There are many historical debates about it. But we will show using argument that supposing we have determined the path through which the slit through which the photon has gone, and we insist no interference pattern will still be there. It will still. So your idea that it depends on how what you do, it acts like a wave. This is nonsense. No, interference pattern will still be there. Supposing I say, because photon is either a wave or a particle, so it will act like a wave no matter whether you close one slit or you don't close one slit. So, but I'm saying let's give this counter argument. Suppose the interference persists even when the slit through which the photon has passed is identified somewhere. We don't care what arrangement is. Then the y coordinate of the photon, I am going to show that this supposition is against uncertainty principle, and therefore this supposition is wrong. So y coordinate of the photon is uncertainty much less than d by 2. Is that clear? Y is the vertical axis, you can say, and the capital D, you remember, is the distance. So delta y, if you know the slit has passed through this, then the delta y has to be less than d by 2. Because if delta y is much more than d, then we won't know which slit is. So position uncertainty has been reduced to d by 2. Now the modifier and that register through which will disturb the y component of the momentum. But we are saying no, it won't disturb enough. An interference pattern will survive. Then the delta py uncertainty should be much less than that required to go from maximum to minimum. Now, when does interference pattern disappear? Interference pattern disappear when there is no difference between maximum and minimum, So the momentum uncertain, the trajectory, I mean the direction along which it is going, if that momentum is much less than that required to go from maximum, then interference pattern will survive. But on the other hand, if delta pi is much greater than px theta will be that. I think you have to just use your geometrical thing. Px is the x direction momentum and theta is the angle between maximum and minimum. So px into theta will be the y component momentum. So delta py should be much less than that y component. It's a bit difficult. You will need these slides will be anyway. This whole thing is given in the. Please go through Schiff's book and Pohenton's book to reflect on what I'm saying. And then theta is known to be from optical theory lambda by 2. So this gives you delta x, delta y. Delta y was less than d by 2. Delta py was px, and sine theta, which for small angle is theta, and theta is lambda by 2 by optics. So it gives you h by 2. So it contradicts the uncertainty principle. And therefore, our earlier supposition, what was the supposition? That even if we localize the photon through which slit it has gone, still interference pattern will survive. This supposition is wrong. That is, the starting proposition is wrong. The interference pattern will indeed disappear in any arrangement that can identify the slit through which the photon has passed. So the quantum mechanical resolution proposed by Niels Bohr and company, I mean all his collaborators, that it depends on the arrangement. If you are not determining, it will be a wave. If you are determining through which the slit goes, it will act like a particle. This resolution is correct because we have shown that if you insist that no, still if it is interference pattern gives, then it goes against the uncertainty. So now discussion about uses a thought experiment. But don't think it is all just theory, etc. Actually, very brilliant experiments have been performed. And I suggest those of you who want to understand all this more critically, you should go to Gottfried and Jahn, and it's very nicely explained. So I'll conclude this lecture by a modern experiment, which will be again a bit difficult, but please go through the references I have given. And so two mercury ions are had this modern experiment in support of quantum mechanical resolution. Two mercury ions are held stationary in a trap. Nowadays, there are traps in which you can, laser traps, etc. You can hold atoms stationary. And linearly polarized laser light impinges on. Now, ions have each spin half. And polarization measurements on scattered photons distinguish two kinds of wave. No spin flip. So spin can be flip, it can be up or down, as you may have known. Sorry, there is some sound. So the ions have spin half. Polarization measurements on scattered photon distinct. There is no spin flip and there is spin flip of one of the ions. So these two kinds of measurements you can do. And one is found to give interference pattern, two does not give interference. Why two does not? What was two? Spin flip of one of the ions. The events in which ions flip their spin, you know from which ion it scattered. It's exactly analogous through which slit the photon went. These are like slits only. These two ions are acting like slits only. So, and the photon is getting, laser light is getting scattered. If you don't determine through which of the two ions the photon has passed by, then there'll be interference pattern. If you determine, if your events are such that spin flip has happened in one of the ions, then you can say, oh, here, say spin flip, the photon has gone and so you have localized the photon, the interference pattern disappears. So such a beautiful experiment, very, very brilliant experiment, established that it is not just thought experiment and theoretical, but actual nature in experiments shows exactly what quantum mechanics says, that if you do not localize a particle, then it will act like a wave in between the arrangement. Where you localize, it becomes a particle. So that's the more details of the cited. Again, this presentation is based on the lecture notes. Shift is this. Please do read this Gottfried and Young. This book will open your eyes on these very subtle, difficult things that I talked about today. And Griffiths is always a good book, as I have told you, and Cohen Kamuji. And I once again thank my colleagues for their support. So, yeah, if there are any questions.
Okay, there are very few questions.
Yeah.
So shall I take them now because it is already past 12, or shall we answer them on Moodle?
Take one at least, because otherwise students will be left out, feel left out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Disha, you can go on for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So one question is that we say that if we detect the electron as a particle, once when we localize the slit, it behaves as a particle and no wave behavior thereafter, even on the screen.
Yeah.
So I think this is sort of a confirmation the person is trying to ask, that
Yes,
once
yes.
it has been
He
detected as a
said
particle.
absolutely correctly. He has said absolutely correct. When
Okay.
photon is localized in the passage itself, then it just becomes a particle and it strikes the screen and it doesn't give any no interference pattern. There's no question of interference pattern. It's not a wave at all. So you localized it. Yeah. Any other question?
Yes. So why are we considering the uncertainty in Y as d/2, capital D/2?
Or if the two slits are distance d apart, and let's consider from origin, the axis is y-axis from the origin. And if you want to be sure that it has passed through one of the, so it is, each slit is d/2 distance away from the center. So won't you like to have delta y much less than d/2? But because if delta y is, for example, is 5d, then can you tell from which slit it has gone? You may, don't worry about d/2. You may even say d. It doesn't matter. Those factors up to it doesn't matter. But don't you see that if delta y is 10d, uncertainty in position is 10d, then will I be able to say that the slit has gone, the photon has gone through the upper slit or the lower slit? If I want to say the photon has gone through the upper slit and not the lower slit, my uncertainty in y coordinate must be, of course, less than d or d/2 to be more strict. I mean, isn't it obvious that if it is much more than d, then I won't be able to tell which slit the photon has gone? Okay. Is the student satisfied, or he or is she? Any response?
Yeah, maybe you can type yes or no so that we know. Okay, so far there is no response, sir.
Okay. I'll answer in the chat. Yeah. One thing before we close the session. Yeah, please do. I had promised in yesterday's introduction session. Please, if you have any problem with terminology, I tried to explain the words. However, if you have problem with terminology, please do type in the chat your questions, because it's a bit impractical in the course to turn to some other language. आपको अगर कोई शब्द पता नहीं लगा है, कोई टर्मिनोलॉजी की कोई प्रॉब्लम है, तो आप चैट में आप लिख सकते हैं, तो मैं उसका जवाब दूंगा उसमें। और ये बात कुछ, इट इज नॉट ओनली फॉर पीपल हु हैव हिंदी मीडियम or anything like that. Many people who have English medium also may have problems with certain terms. So it's not just question of medium, it's a question of physics language. So please, language related questions, please also ask in the chat. I'll explain them properly in the chat, because the lecture timing is too short to explain everything in different languages. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, so sir, that student has replied yes. So
Okay.
she understood.
Yeah. Acha, the earlier student. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. So we meet tomorrow for the next lecture.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing. Is it over? Should we?
Yeah, you may leave if you want. Yeah. We'll
Okay.
keep the room open for another 2-3 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Dhaval, please stop.